And talking about mortality, well, it's important to remind that the main Odyssey outcome studies show a significant reduction in total mortality, a trend in the reduction of coronary and cardiovascular mortality. The total mortality, because of the hierarchical design of the study, was only nominal in terms of statistical significance, but it was there. In the group with LDL above 100, it was positive also in all three different kinds of mortality. And in this particular analysis of mortality, published very recently in Circulation, it has been clearly observed that there is a reduction in mortality, in total mortality, in the group treated with alirocumab with a nominal P of 0.026. But more than that, if you study the subgroup of individuals who have at least a follow-up of a minimum of 3 years, this difference in mortality is more important than if you use the data from the whole population. So the message from this observation is that the benefit associated to the use of PCSK9 inhibitors, in this case alirocumab, probably increases with time of therapy, as it has been observed in this particular study associated to mortality. Starting earlier and maintaining therapy will produce an improvement in our results in this therapy. And another important result, I think, is very important in terms of the decision making during our clinical activity, where we consider the number of individuals to treat when we are recommending this kind of therapies, is the analysis of the total number of events observed in both the Fourier, we have data from the Fourier, and the Odyssey outcomes trial. As you know, the original studies are designed to give results in the time to the first event. Once one patient has an event, is censored, so if this patient has other events, these other events are not counted in the study. Only the first event is included in the analysis of the original publications. However, in a secondary study, all events have been included and have been counted, and both in the Fourier but also in the Odyssey outcomes. So the number of total events that have been avoided in these studies is twice the original one. You see here in the Odyssey outcomes how in the first study 190 events were avoided, while when we count all events, instead of 190, we are avoiding 385. This is very important because the number of events is associated to NNTs. We cannot change the NNTs, but we can say that the NNTs in this particular situation probably are the number needed to treat, but not to avoid one event, but to avoid 2 events. I think this is important when taking into consideration the risk and benefit of this kind of therapies. Another message that I think can be derived from these sub-studies is the effect of obtaining extremely low LDL cholesterol concentrations. And in this sub-study, it was analyzed the impact of those individuals who were recruited with an LDL above about 70 milligrams per deciliter. So the use of alirocumab put some of them with LDL below 15, many of them because the design of the study were shifted from alirocumab to placebo. So an analysis of this situation performed using the propensity score matching. That means that a placebo group was defined to match with those individuals achieving extremely low LDL levels. It was observed that even in those individuals who start with 70 and achieve LDL below 15, mean 9 milligrams per deciliter of LDL, obtain even an incremental benefit in terms of cardiovascular risk reduction. This is very important and is in concordance with other data from other studies showing that the lower the LDL achieved, the better the result in terms of cardiovascular benefit. And more than that, these extremely low LDL levels are safe. In this particular study, so no differences in neurocognitive events, no differences in hemorrhagic stroke, and no differences in new onset diabetes were observed, even at these extremely low LDL cholesterol levels. To conclude, I would like to say that there is a need to clearly identify populations with the highest cardiovascular risk that may benefit the most from PCSK9 inhibition. The Odyssey outcomes and Fourier subanalysis in people with diabetes with higher baseline risk have shown similar relative risk reduction, but, and this is important in terms of NNT, greater absolute risk reduction. And there are other situations in secondary prevention as recurrent cardiovascular disease, recent MI, recurrent MI, and peripheral artery disease, LDL higher than 100, polyvascular disease, previous CABG, that, of course, show a group that will obtain more benefit from this kind of therapy. And the new guidelines now recommend for very high-risk populations an LDL target of less than 55 milligrams per deciliter, and a PCSK9 inhibitor is indicated if this target is not achieved. And unfortunately, in real life, the use of PCSK9 inhibitor remains clearly far from optimal. So thank you very much for your attention.